Hi, this is my review of Era the Consortium, the Time Travel Campaign, Part 2. If you haven't seen my review of Part 1, I'm going to put the link in the description below so that you can check it out. This is the sequel of this campaign, where you can modify the entire timeline of Era the Consortium. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. I only have two criticisms. First, there are a few typos. They're not a big deal, but I will notify Ed Joe, the designer, about them. So maybe those will be changed in the future, probably. And the character sheets look a bit blurry. I already contacted Ed about this, and that is going to be corrected. But despite that, the quality is great. Everything is well organized and written. You do not have bookmarks, but you have a hyperlinked table of contents. The graphic design and layout is great as well. So overall, the quality is good despite those criticisms. Now, let's talk about the content. After getting a brief introduction to this part 2, you get a very strong sense that the characters in this part of the campaign have a really rough time. The campaign begins with the former generation of the agents of change, of those operatives that were sent into the past to change key moments that would supposedly steer the timeline of Era the Consortium towards a cataclysm, a disaster for the Consortium. So you see how the former agents of change are became quite paranoid. Many of their plans and projects and advancement overall in their effort to change the timeline has been thwarted. Some of their actions have been frustrated by some unknown influence or presence. They become quite paranoid. They do not know if this is an attempt of the illusions who are just coming into contact with humans, and there is some sort of like intelligence that does not want the timeline to change, or maybe there is just some very skilled and intelligent individuals in this particular section of the timeline that are noticing what the player characters are doing and they want to stop them. But there's also the most frightening possibility that maybe there is another time traveler, possibly from even further ahead in the timeline, that came back to move things and manipulate matters according to his or her own wishes. The possibility of a traitor is also quite alarming, because the way that their plans have been thwarted, it just seems too convenient and too perfect. So these former agents of change decide to remove their implants, their cranial implants that allow them to make forecasts and to store a lot of information and rely on the knowledge of their predecessors. And they lock themselves into a sort of like a safe house, sort of. And they can only escape from that place by activating a mechanism of escape that requires the participation of 3 of the members of the team. However, this turns into a trap, and their enemy kills them all through an explosive. However, the agents of change manage to put their implants and some words of caution and information so that their children, that this reaches out to their children and they carry on with the mission. So in this part of the campaign, you play as the sons and the daughters of those agents of change. They feel quite vulnerable, insecure. They did not receive the specialized training that their grandfathers and fathers received, so they feel a bit left out, and this new enemy has been moving things along, manipulating things, so that all of their economical and political power is out of reach. Many unsavory individuals and forces have taken control of all of their assets, so it's up to this current generation of agents of change to retake what is theirs by birthright, you could say. So all of these missions have to do with investigation, with finding out who this hidden enemy is, finding out ways in which the characters can recover their money and their influence, and this will not be easy. In this part 2 of the time travel campaign, you see a more human aspect of the Agents of Change, because the first generation seemed a bit too perfect, but at the same time too mechanical because of the rigorous and torturous training that they went through. And the other generation, although it felt a bit more human, they also received quite a bit of rough preparation and conditioning, mental and physical, and their implants had a very strong influence over them. So with this current generation, you see their hopes, their wishes, and their fear, their flaws, as they try to come into terms that they are facing a titanic mission. The entire fate of the Consortium of humanity and many other alien races depends completely on the way that the timeline will be changed. And these agents of change do not have the economic and political leverage to move things their way. So it's all about recovering what is yours by right, even through blackmail and through assassination and through all sort of unsavory activities. The characters will have to find a way to establish a new position of power. Later on, the enemy will start to hunt them down, probing them. Like, it's kind of like this new enemy is poking them, testing them, and seeing what they are capable of doing, or if he can somehow manipulate the Agents of Change in some way. When the characters finally get enough power to challenge their enemy, it's going to turn into a very lethal and exciting series of missions. When they finally discover the identity of their enemy, they will discover that it was Thomas Hayden. This makes a lot of sense because the first corporation that the characters potentially took down in part 1 was Hayden Banking. So Thomas Hayden came from further ahead in the timeline with superior technology and skills and went back with the intention of manipulating things his way. And he was responsible for the deaths of the parents of the current Agents of Change. So once these agents manage to get rid of this major threat, they can focus on other things. A recurring objective of this part 2 is the integration of the Illusians into the Consortium. The Illusians have superior technology, but they are quite naive. They are not as Machiavellic as humans. So it's up to the Agents of Change to find a way to integrate the Illusians in a position of advantage, if not at least of equality, when it comes to their technology and their political leverage. Because in the original timeline, you could say that the Illusians got the short end of the stick. Their technology was almost taken from them completely, almost. And they didn't have a strong voice until further on ahead in the timeline of the Consortium. So in this timeline, you have to make sure that the Illusians keep their technology and that technology is used for the benefit of the Consortium as a whole, to avoid that cataclysm in the future. The player characters will have to take many risks and perform some shady things to accomplish this. They will have to carry out secret meetings with the Illusians. They will have to get rid of those within the Consortium that do not want to pass the bill or approve the integration of the Illusians, with the Illusians in a position of advantage or equality. And they also may have to murder the leaders of the Illusians who had their secret meetings with the Agents of Change, because everything should be kept completely under wraps. So this is a very shady situation. Sometimes you'll probably wonder if you're playing as anti-heroes or if the player characters are still heroic. I guess you will only find out if you have adventures through the different parts of this time travel campaign. Something that I really liked of the way the characters develop and deal with different hardships is that there is a point where Thomas Hayden actually manages to deactivate or ruin the mental implants, the cranial implants, and the characters do not have access to the forecast capabilities of the implants, and they won't have access to all of the skills that their predecessors had. Everything related to combat and calculations and planning that they relied on the implant to use effectively, they no longer have access to that, and they have to rely on their own natural qualities. And this is somewhat unsettling because their training falls a bit short when compared to the training of the former generations. Later on, you also see hints that there is something quite disturbing about these implants. Sometimes it feels like the spirits of the former agents of change are constantly hovering over the thoughts and feelings of the current agents of change. So who knows what will happen in the future as these implants have more and more influence over the thoughts of the future generations of the agents of change. Later on in this part 2, you have all the information concerning the weapons and the gear that the characters will find in this section of the timeline. And near the end of the book, you also have an excellent section, quite similar to part 1, where you have general advice on how to handle all of the outcomes of the different missions. Because this campaign is quite open. Although you have certain objectives, you have different routes to success. So you have a lot of tips and advice on how to handle all of that, all of the aftermath individually, and taking the part 2 as a whole. So what do I think of this part 2 of the time travel campaign? I think this is a worthy sequel. I also like it that they changed the pace a bit. With part 1, you felt like the agents of change had a lot of an advantage over anyone they interacted with in the section of the timeline. But here they really pull the rug from under your feet. Suddenly there is some other time traveler with even more advanced technology and skills. You feel completely like the underdog, and that really makes for a nice change of pace. It breaks the monotony, it surprises you, and it reminds you that things are not going to always go as you would have hoped them to proceed. I also like that the personalities of the agents of change in this part 2 differ drastically from the other ones, so you really notice the change from one generation to the other, that jump in the way of handling things and approaching this huge plan of changing the entire timeline of Era the Consortium. So I highly recommend that you get this part 2. It will not disappoint you, and it gets me really excited about what we will see in part 3 and future parts of the time travel campaign. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.